Hey guys, Future Tom from the editing floor here. I need to admit my shame. It takes me way too long to record full, almost like podcast length videos like this. So Link and I actually recorded this a fair while ago. As such, there's a couple references that we make throughout the episode to things like, I don't know, the Final Fantasy Tactics remake and how we haven't heard anything about it for so long and it's probably not coming out and yada, yada, yada. Obviously, we know that's not true at this point. It is very much happening. So just wanted to put it out there. There's a couple of things that are slightly outdated in the references that we make in this video, but the topic itself still very sound. We still want to know what's going on with Fire Emblem and discussing what we think is going to wind up being the future of it. So I hope you enjoy, despite a couple of outdated references. I'm going to let us from the past carry it from here. See ya. Where is it, Intelligent Systems? Where is it? The Switch 2 is coming. Damn it, show it to us. Of course, we're talking about Fire Emblem, what the potential new release is going to be, and we do have a very special guest once again for this particular video. It is Link King himself. So I hope you're looking forward to this discussion. I certainly am. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. And yes, here we are back once again. Link, welcome back to the show, my friend. It is very good to have you here. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and like you said in the intro, literally, where is it? I mean, for the first Direct for the Switch 1, I was like, I really don't want to see it. But in the second Direct for the Switch 2, I was like, come on, it has to be here. And it's not.
I mean, isn't Fire Emblem supposed to be one of, like, the pillars of Nintendo at this point? Is that not the messaging that we've been hearing for the past couple of years? And yet, where is it? It makes no damn sense, man. Oh,
it really doesn't. And there's a lot of things. I mean, if we were to look back into the Direct itself, I mean, how many first-party games that are unique to the Switch 2 did we really get? We didn't get that much. So I guess in one way it makes sense, but in another way it doesn't. Like, this is an easy slam dunk start of console game to just throw out there. And it's kind of baffling.
Well, that's what's so interesting, right? Because as much as there's all this discussion right now around like the pricing of the Switch 2, the games, what's coming out on it, yada, 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 it is kind of interesting to note that we don't have any of the heavy hitters. We don't have a new Mario. We have a new Donkey Kong, which is kind of adjacent, but it's not a new Mario. We don't have a new Zelda. We've got updated versions of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. We've got a Switch 2 updated version of Metroid Prime 4, which probably should have just been a Switch 2 exclusive to begin with. But like the big heavy hitters, Fire Emblem, new Mario, new Zelda, they're not there. And as, big turn-based strategy RPG people, of course, we care the most about Fire Emblem, but it makes you wonder what Nintendo's strategy is here. Does maybe Intelligent Systems have something kind of being held back for maybe a future release wave or something like that? Where do we think we're at right now? Because I know you in particular, you put out a video talking about the potential appearance, shall we say, of that fabled genealogy remake. Is that what we were expecting at this point? Has it been so long that we think we're going to have a new mainline entry? Like, what are we looking at here? Because at this point, I have no idea what the heck we're doing.
Yeah, so a few years back, egg on my face, I made a video criticizing leakers for leaking this asinine leak about Engage with those pictures that looked absolutely fan-made and fake, and the entire community was like, what is this? There's no way this is the next. And that was completely right. And among those leaks was the Warriors game.
Yep.
And was the fabled genealogy remake. Yep. Everything else in that leak has actually been proven true. And so, like, there's this saying in modern magic, right? Or maybe it's old magic, I don't know, that if one part of the magic trick was seen to be phony, the entire rest of the mirage falls apart, right? Because you found that fake thread. But here it's the opposite. It's like, well, we haven't, and none of this has been proven false yet. And so it's innocent until proven guilty. They have leaked a true leak, and part of that was the FE4 remake. And so I'm thinking like, okay, it was supposed to be on the Switch. It didn't come. So part of me thinks that maybe this got canceled, delayed, scrapped, remade for the Switch 2.
I mean, I think it's certainly a solid option. I would even go as far back as wondering, okay, was this fabled genealogy remake originally supposed to be another in the sort of potential side series of Fire Emblem Echoes games, right? And I'm sure you've heard this topic of conversation before. But we had Echoes, Shadows of Valencia, the remake of Gaiden, back on the 3DS at the very end of the 3DS's life cycle. And even back then, I had been hearing discussions and rumors far less substantiated than that came with the Engage leaks, of a potential for a remake for FE4. Now, obviously, Echoes did not do particularly well because the Switch had already been out for a couple of years. People were moving in mass off of the 3DS. Even though it was a very good game, it did not see a lot of traction. So then kind of the theory that I heard and that I ran with was, well, they scrapped that version and now they're doing it for the Switch. Then Three Houses came out. Then after significant delays, we learned afterwards, Engage came out. And now the Switch 2 is coming out. And yet still, Genealogy isn't here. So have we now potentially gone through 2 generations of scrapped remakes to keep updating, to keep revamping, to keep improving, to make potentially the best version of FE4 that they could make? And I don't know. I mean, it's possible. It's certainly possible. Because if there's any game in the series that's going to bring people back who were jaded by Engage, and I know this is something that you've gotten flack for before, I have as well. We're both in that same boat. But people who didn't like Engage, could this be the way to bring those people back while still getting the modern audience into the older stories and deeper lore and deeper characters that we used to have back in the original days of FE4? And I'm curious to hear what you think about that, because as we were kind of discussing prior to starting the recording, if there's a story in Fire Emblem that's going to bring in the widest audiences possible while still being deep, I think it's FE4.
Yeah. So let's talk facts. And when I talk facts, I say numbers, right? I'm a big numbers guy. We all talk about growths and level ups and averages and turn counts and all that stuff for Fire Emblem. It's basically glorified math and strategy, right? And so when we talk about Fire Emblem sales specifically, our biggest seller is Fire Emblem Three Houses. In the history of Fire Emblem, nothing else even comes close. I think it's got over 4 million sales at this point or something ridiculous like that. Certainly more than 3 million. When you look at Echoes sold 1 million copies. Now, when we look at something like a Triangle Strategy, when we look at something like a Final Fantasy Tactics, when we look at other strategy RPG adjacents, when they reach 1 million sales, that's good. That is considered good. And so I don't think Echoes failed. Now, if you want to look at the relative curve, sure, we have Awakening at almost 2.5 million. We have Fates at a little over 3 million. Now, granted, keeping in mind that had 3 different versions, I'm not entirely sure how the math was done on that, but Fates was at around 3 million. It was a big hit, no doubt about that. And then we had Echoes at 1 million, so it was really the first dip in that post-Awakening era, and then right back after, Three Houses shot up to over 4 million copies sold.
Right.
And then we had another dip in Engage, which was last recorded at about 1.6. Now, I think that 1.6 is probably not a true value. That was relatively early on in the sales cycle, and we never really saw an update after that. So I would be willing to estimate Engage selling at around 2 million. Certainly not a failure.
No.
But it is a dip from where we were in Three Houses. Now, do we look at Engage and say, hey, mainline Fire Emblem's failing? No, we don't. No, we don't. And so Echoes having undersold or not done well, I don't think precludes us from seeing another version. May I remind you that Shadow Dragon sold about 500,000 copies, and New Mystery probably sold half of that. It didn't stop them from making less of those or not doing Echoes after that.
Right.
Remakes historically sell less. So keeping that in mind, keeping in mind the success of Three Houses, the voice actor overlap between Three Houses and the FE4 characters in Fire Emblem Heroes, for example, the political intrigue and setting and story relevance of a Fire Emblem 4 when compared to Three Houses has really showed, Three Houses had that big success with the story and lore and the depth and the character back and forth. Well, what do you think's going to happen when they release Fire Emblem 4? I mean, I already get enough hate as is for defending Arvis. Can you imagine some modern people joining my ranks?
Oh boy, I hadn't even thought about the Twitter firestorms that could be started as part of that, no pun intended. Oh my. Which would be very good for exposure for the game as well. So I mean, hey, there's something there. I absolutely hear what you're saying, for sure. And of course, we need to consider that like pre-Awakening sales were always going to be way lower on the Fire Emblem series because just people weren't aware of it, right? And I think, to me, that may be part of what could potentially have IS and Nintendo scared, right? Because like they kicked off this new quote unquote, obviously to us it wasn't new, but in the general populace scope, new series with Awakening, with Fates, with Three Houses, like boom, we're going up, stonks up, red line must go up, and then red line goes down. And it's like, oh no, what did we do? And then if they have this big project cooking that has a sweeping story, across a huge swath of land with a giant cast of both protagonists and antagonists, villains and anti-villains, with a very deep, for modern Fire Emblem, fairly dark story. Got to do that justice, right? So with the power of the Switch 2, maybe that's where you could start to get into making it really justifiably big. So for me, coming at it from like a consumer perspective, thinking less of a numbers perspective as we're prone to as hardcore Fire Emblem players, people have been critiquing all sorts of things with like visuals and game design and different, like, oh, there's branching paths, but then like things don't really balance out, and like, oh, the Edelgard path was pretty underbaked compared to all the other paths in Three Houses. Like all these things that people are more prone to critiquing. Maybe we're seeing a push to have the thing be fully baked, use the best hardware, use the best tech to put what I would argue is one of the best stories in the franchise out there for everyone to see, especially when the majority of the world has never seen it in official capacity, right? So I'm wondering if that's what's been happening over and over again.
I pray that that is what they're doing. I mean, I, for one, can think of at least 10 scenes in this game that I would love to see animated in like a movie cutscene format with full voice acting.
Oh, yeah.
Just high quality, 30 frames per second animation at the very least, pre-rendered cutscenes, like the drama that would ensue from having those with like Fire Emblem 4 already has one of the most beautiful soundtracks.
Oh, yeah.
Any game. It is a legendary OST. If you have not heard it, I would implore you to go, because it is a timeless OST that is almost 30 years old. Next year is the 30-year anniversary of Genealogy. I'm just going to put that out there. Okay?
Oh, I didn't know that, actually. That's interesting.
That game came out in 1996. It is older than probably 90% of people watching this video.
Most likely.
Yeah. And that's not a dig at people watching the video. It's just a fun fact to say these games are old.
Numbers.
And so we're at there. We're at that point where I know a lot of people want an Awakening remake, but come on, guys, Awakening's 12 years old.
Yeah, like, I've seen that before. Like, what are y'all smoking? An Awakening remake? You can play that game and it still looks and feels good. Get out of here. Let me see any modern Fire Emblem fan boot up a ROM of Genealogy and be like, oh my god, what the hell am I looking at? Like...
And then you need to get, like, the translation patches and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy to do, trust me, and there's probably some, like, HD texture packs that'll make it look nicer than it really should and all that stuff. But, like, Awakening is still relatively easy to access, and it's all in English, and it has some voice acting, and the animations are good. And I saw people throwing out, like, it's time for a Fates remake, because Fates is 10 years old.
Oh my god, I mean, stop. Stop. Like, beyond any, like, oh, I can feel my bones withering away to dust, which is I am immune to because I'm immortal. But I know other people have that reaction all the time. Like, I remember watching the preview material for Fates back in college and being like, this is the pinnacle of what Fire Emblem can look like. And yeah, okay, Engage in Three Houses look nicer, quote unquote, because they're on modern systems. But like, Fates holds up great. Fates looks great. Even just Fates to Awakening is such a huge jump. Or, well, the other way around, but you know what I mean? Like, that does not need a remake. Absolutely not. Get out of here.
And I don't think it's just the visuals as well, honestly. Like, when I think of a remake, look at how much Echoes changed from the base game. It did stay faithful in a lot of ways, but they made so many gameplay changes. They made story changes even. They added characters. They somewhat, the maps for the most part stayed the same, but then they had this free roam area that you can walk around in the caves. And you know, Echoes, like, Gaiden originally had that, like, traditional RPG feel where you were walking around the towns and talking to people, so that was there. But for the rest of the Fire Emblem series, that was non-existent, so they had to redo all of that from all over and then enhance it a little bit further. You had all of the trainee units and the way that system worked, and they even kept in the Dread Fighter glitch that you kept looping? They kept that in. So it was just really cool to see. And from a gameplay perspective, if you remake Awakening, like, what are you really going to change?
Yeah, like, what are you going to add? Like, you going to have, like, what, more classes? Why? There's already more classes than you can shake a stick at. Like, you can add characters? Of course not. The narrative is built around what those characters do. Like, If anything, the only thing I could see them doing would be like incorporating all of the DLC paralogs and making it easier to get characters, which would not only shatter game balance in half if they did it wrong, but would also just like lessen the impact of a lot of things that happen. Like, it is absolutely a complete package. Just bundle the DLC into a new release and like maybe update the graphics and you're done. Like, that's all you got.
Yeah, honestly. And so, I mean, that's sort of my take when I see a remake. I see 3 like real contenders thrown around, and all of these 3 I would somewhat be okay with, although I have a clear bias towards one of them. But genealogy's the big one.
Mm-hmm.
It's the big obvious one that a lot of people want, and it's next in line. They've done 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
A little bit out of order. They did it 1, 3, 2, but fair. They wanted to keep the Marth games next to each other.
Yep.
So after that, you're on to 4, 5. Those are the last SNES era ones left to make. They're packaged in with the way their story is written. The characters are shared. It makes sense to do one, if not both, on the Switch 2, honestly. You could really make... I'm not saying put them both together because the gameplay is drastically different, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I mean, having both of those, one at the start of the Switch 2 lifetime and maybe one at near the end, with a couple of mainline games sandwiched in between. And then you get the beautiful GBA trilogy in 6, 7, and 8. Those will be due remakes at some point, and they're very popular fan favorites. But I also see Path of Radiance talked about a lot, and when we talk about no Fire Emblem in the Switch 2 Direct, that's actually factually incorrect, because we did get Path of Radiance shown in it.
That's true.
And it's coming to the Virtual Console.
It's, man, you broached so many different topics there, all of which I want to touch on, but you're right, they don't all... some of them need their own video.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about them. You know, it's your channel, your video. You guide us in the direction that you want to go in.
The real question is, how much editing do I feel like doing for this video? So
that's all you.
So, okay. The big thing is the fact that we're trying to slowly introduce the entirety of the franchise to the global market, right? Because as we've talked about, 1 through 6 never came out in the Western market. It was exclusively like Japan and the relevant nearby regions. Then 7, that was billed as Fire Emblem everywhere else as if it wasn't the 7th entry in the series, came out, started to garner interest, Smash Bros, all that type of stuff, and everything grew from there. So now, as you pointed out, we've got 1, 2, and 3 all have some form of remake. Now, notably, 3 never came out in the West again once as well, so that's kind of a weird tidbit. But then, logically, you've got 4, and then, for those who are in the know, 5, because 5 takes place in the middle of 4. Those obviously should be the next things to happen. You have characters being introduced through Engage. Engage did see a lot of traction, introduced a lot of people to characters like Sigurd and Leaf and their relevant stories, and through like the bond rings, you got a bunch of other characters who got exposure and all that type of stuff. The heroes as well, like obviously. But a lot of the global fan base doesn't know about these characters, so it makes sense to bring them in now. The question then becomes, are we in a situation where, due to the story, regardless of gameplay issues, because I'm fully on board with you on that, the difference between 4 and 5 in terms of gameplay is so dramatic, but do we see a situation where IS feels potentially compelled to release a complete package 4 and 5 bundle, the Jugdral Saga or something like that, because we had Shadows of Valencia before, why not Shadows of Jugdral? And it's like both put together in some weird way, maybe titled differently, but I could see that, and it would make sense why it's taking so long to do if that's what they were trying to do.
So how do you make it work?
Well, I mean, that's the question, right? That's the question, because Thracia did so much differently with the capture mechanics and fatigue, and if you escape with Leaf before all of your characters have escaped, then those characters get captured and you have to get them later. It's so wildly different, but I can see from a scummy businessman perspective why you would want to try to do that to draw in as many people as possible. The other side, of course, being if you release them separately, then you could potentially get more sales that way.
Yeah.
But that's so much more dev time. I don't know. It's kind of one of the big questions that we've had as a community for a long time. So do you think it's feasible? Do you think it's reasonable to try and do?
The only way I can see it being done is at the sacrifice of one of the two games' gameplays. And the more likely one that will be sacrificed, because it is more of a standout game in the series for what it did in terms of the scale of it, is Fire Emblem 4. So it would be much easier, albeit wouldn't make much sense, to dumb down the gameplay of Fire Emblem 4 than try to wrongly so elevate the gameplay of a Thracia to be on the same scale. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then that will come at the cost of the large-scale maps, the visual depiction of the story, the multiple events occurring at the same time across the continent that you're watching, and just the general traversal of the continent of FE4. Like, you get to watch your characters literally walk across the entire continent, barring very small patches that are not relevant. But again, there's this map that I always reference, and I always will, that if you put all of the maps of the game on top of a map of the continent, you can match them up and watch them walking through. I'll send it to you afterwards because it's really cool if you haven't seen it already. I'm sure you have.
I have, yeah.
But
for the viewers, we'll put it up.
I love that. I love that. And I think to deprive people of that would be a shame, but also to have to force the Thracia fans to give up their gameplay, because Thracia also did a lot of unique stuff in its gameplay as well. It capped characters at 20 in all of their stats. It had all of these like difficult, small, tight map design maps, and you would have to change all that if you were to make it on the same level of genealogy. And so I don't think that trying to make them on a level playing field would work. Now, the only way I could see it work if you package them together would be to have you play the first half of Fire Emblem 4.
Yep.
And then when that initial screen stops and the little, Star Wars text starts to roll, it stops you. And it says, okay, now it's time for you to play Fire Emblem 5. And then you have to play through all of that and then start Chapter 6 afterwards of Fire Emblem 4, which also wouldn't make sense, because the point at which you, Seliph and Leaf, meet up in Fire Emblem 4 is not the same point that you finish off at in Fire Emblem 5.
Yep.
It just doesn't work.
Yeah. I agree.
Logistically, it doesn't make sense.
It's such a difficult thing to answer. I do wonder if that is part of what's causing this delay that we're seeing. Because we've talked previously about the release timeline of Engage and how since then it makes sense that we'd be starting to get a marketing campaign spinning up for whatever the new thing is going to be, and we haven't seen that yet, and we've talked about some of the reasons that may be and everything. But I do really wonder if IS isn't just trying to tackle how they're going to do this if they want to do this. And that's where the question comes in. Are they even bothering with remakes of FE4 or FE5 or both? Or are they trying to move ahead with a new title? And that kind of leads me into a follow-up question that has to do with the type of content we've both been doing recently. But before we get to that, I think the topic of a new title versus remakes is worth exploring as well. So I personally feel like at this point, they might want to push the envelope. And this is just me putting myself in the shoes of like an IS or Nintendo exec, but might push the envelope of trying to make something new to regain player faith, to try, foolishly or not, to regain those Fates, Three Houses numbers, to have the most eyes on a remake that, as you said earlier, Link, are generally less purchased, generally less popular, but can still move units. So maybe that's what they're trying to go for, and that's why we've seen the delay. But what do you think? Does it make more sense to try to push for a remake right now, or do you think maybe they've switched tracks to go for something new first and kind of sidelined the genealogy remake as a result?
Yeah, so, that's a really good question. I'm glad you brought it up, because I feel like there's two schools of thought here, right? Because when you think new system, you have to think about a player base that is non-existent, right? We don't know how many units this system is going to sell. We don't know how many units are even on the market in the first place. Like, I was looking at European sales numbers very enviously because I'm waiting to be able to buy my own. But it was saying that the Switch 2 pre-orders are sold out worldwide. Literally almost every single place I looked at has had it out of stock. But who are the people buying? These are most likely, Mario Kart, Donkey Kong fans, or just Nintendo fanatics, or scalpers. Those are probably the groups of people who are buying, but how many of these people overlap with being Fire Emblem fans? I'm a huge Mario Kart nerd, part of why I want, Mario Kart Day 1 when I can get my hands on it. But with Fire Emblem, it's far more niche. Like, Mario Kart sells 30 or 40 million copies every year.
Easy.
It's
easy.
insane.
Yeah.
Three Houses is at 4. And so I wonder, is Nintendo or Intelligent Systems trying to think, are we going to put out a brand new game that we don't know what the reception to is, and we don't know whether or not this will be a system seller, as in, will these Three Houses, Awakening, Fates fans buy the Switch 2 for this Fire Emblem game specifically? Or do we go for a tried and true remake of Genealogy, a game that we all know is very highly respected and beloved, that we know the hardcore fans will absolutely buy our system for? Or do they say, hey, we have this brand new game that we've been working on behind the scenes for 4 or 5 years. We think this is a banger. We can use this to sell the platform. That's kind of the discussion that I see, or that I think of in my mind. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely fair, and as much as it pains me to say, we know for a fact, I would argue, that due to the sheer numbers and the economics of it all, IS and Nintendo care way more about the newer fan base and the potential for bringing in new players with new releases. The gameplay innovations, if you will, the addition of things like casual mode, Phoenix mode, the turn wheel, all sorts of different mechanics, things that I feel like we could probably get into a good discussion of for its own separate video down the line, have been catered towards trying to bring in people who are not already entrenched in this franchise as we are. And to do that with a new game, whether it be a remake or a completely new title, to me it feels like the best way to do that is to continue to push forward with new titles, because people won't feel like they wind up having this sort of like, oh, well, this is already something that people know about, right? Like, there's a sense of exploration and wonder, and no one knows what's happening here, and I get to find it out alongside everyone else. That sense of community building that definitely people are very entrenched in, because it adds to that sense of wonder. Whereas if you remake Genealogy, there's going to be certain things that carry over from the original SNES release, things that you know, that I know, that plenty of other creators, and beyond that, plenty of just people who are entrenched in the series know about, like, major versus minor holy blood, and how inheritance works, and how different skills work, and where you can find different secrets on maps, because I would assume they would keep all those types of things in, because it's part of the soul of the game. And people who are new are going to be like, well, wait, this is here, that's there, wait, how do you already all know this? Like, it could be isolating, but to be someone who gets into something new alongside everybody else, that's enticing. So to try to get numbers up, to try to get a system sold, I wouldn't be surprised if they want to go for something that is new to everyone, because then everyone who's in Fire Emblem is going to want to get the system. And right now, especially with world events and everything, that's, I feel like, what Nintendo and IS care, well, more Nintendo. IS just wants to sell their games, but Nintendo wants more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, and honestly, I could see it go either way. I really don't have a slam dunk prediction for this. a lot of people I saw were also saying, oh, they put Path of Radiance for the Virtual Console. That means they're remaking that. I actually think that means there's less of a chance we're going to see Path of Radiance if they're giving it to you for free.
Oh, yeah.
So unfortunately, that camp has probably fallen by the wayside a little bit. But yeah, I don't know if we would get a brand new game or if we would get a remake at this point. It is very, very hard to say, especially on a new console cycle. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think they can really go wrong with whatever choice they make.
That's true.
Because this console is going to be there for 7, 8 more years. Like if you put out the remake now, what's the worst case scenario? It flops. And then you put out whatever banger new game you're working on in like another 3 years, because that's usually the Fire Emblem cycle, right? We get one every 2 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You put out a new one in 3 years, and everybody loves that, and they're like, "Where can I get more?" And they're going to be like, "Well, funny you say that. On this very system, we have this remake that flopped. Why don't you buy that?" And people will be more inclined to get that. So you never know. I mean, we have Engage and Three Houses, which isn't really a good model. I don't think many people went from Engage back to Three Houses. I think it was mostly people who love Three Houses tried Engage.
Mm-hmm.
But I could easily see that backflow happening if, like, the popularity of Three Houses definitely got people to go back and play some of the older games. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And so you would probably wonder, would releasing a less popular game first get people to go back and then buy that less popular game after a big popularity game that would come out that would draw new eyes? Who knows?
Ah, man. That in and of itself is a very interesting question, because then you get into the whole, like, Nintendo doesn't tend to drop prices, so at the end of the day, could they still wind up getting the same or an equivalent-ish economic value from something that quote-unquote flopped, if then later they put out something that makes people go back? Like, that is definitely an interesting question in its own right, for sure. And it makes me think about, like, okay, the point of Engage was all the different characters from the past, from the rest of the series, and how you were introduced to them. You got to learn about them. You had bond conversations with them. Like, you did whole chapters that were major important story chapters from their games. And for us who know all those things, it was cool. But for people who didn't, who either had never played Heroes, which did a lot of the same thing, or who just had never heard of these characters before, like, oh, like, what is this about? Like, oh, what are, like, the little hints, the Easter eggs, the implications about all this type of stuff? I'd like to learn about it. And then some of those games, they just can't. And it's like, maybe that's part of the reason, right? And then if we release a remake, it's like, hey, you like that Sigurd guy? You like his son, Seliph, that gets mentioned but doesn't actually show up, which is kind of weird in and of itself. But, like, you like that Leaf guy? Yeah, he's there. Like, you can learn about them. So if it's a long-term plan, I maybe wouldn't be surprised if they put a remake out first that's going to sell less and then put out a new thing later, potentially. Because realistically, think about it on, like, a business standpoint. It's going to be like, all right, well, year one, we have, like, a Metroid game and different, like, a Donkey Kong game, but then, like, at the tail end of that, maybe that's when we put out the big Mario game, and that's what pushes people to buy the system. Then year two, it's like, oh, here's the new Zelda game. Year three, here's the new Fire Emblem game, maybe, like, have a big release each year, because as you said, like, we're the minority here. The Fire Emblem fans are definitely nowhere near as big as the Mario Kart or Mario fans or the Zelda fans or whatever, but that could potentially be the direction that they go from a business standpoint. So I do like that thought process for sure.
Yeah, and again, with Nintendo, it's almost impossible to predict. They're some of the most unpredictable gaming companies. They are people who will just, I wouldn't be surprised if tomorrow they were just like, hey guys, Fire Emblem Direct on Wednesday, see you there. And it's just like, where did this come from?
We're just, like, scrambling. They're kicking up dust as we're, like, sprinting towards being prepped. Yeah.
And I'm like, now I have to take a day off work. Like, I got to make content on this. I can't call in sick. Like, what are we doing here?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is definitely the thing. Like, there's people that love Nintendo. There's people that hate Nintendo. But if there's something that I can respect about them from the terms of, like, gaming as art, they always keep people on their toes. No one can ever expect what's going to be happening. The other thing that I am curious about, though, and I think it may have a bigger impact than either of us could potentially predict would be the rise in indie Fire Emblem likes and just the tactics genre writ large since Three Houses and especially Engage came out. Because we know Engage, from those leaks that we talked about at the beginning of this episode, Engage was largely ready to go for like a year and a half, 2 years prior to it launching, from what I remember. Since that point, there's been a deluge of indie titles, of what I would say would be AA titles, like your Triangle Strategies and your Dealfield Chronicles and your Unicorn Overlords and all that type of stuff. Tactics Ogre Reborn, which rides that line between remaster and remake with the inclusion of like revamped graphics and voice acting and all that type of stuff. The strategy tactics genre has seen a huge resurgence, and largely in part, I would say, due to Fire Emblem. But I'm wondering if that's kind of got IS quaking in their boots a little bit. If they feel like they need to really up the ante now that they're not the only kids on the block. So do you think that could be something that we're looking at here? Because I feel like it could be.
No, I don't think. I think the only thing that would take attention away from a new Fire Emblem game would be Final Fantasy Tactics Remake, like on a large scale. And that's something that was leaked years ago.
Oh, yeah, it was. I've been banging on that drum for years now, baby.
Yeah, but we haven't heard or seen or smelled anything to do with that in ages and ages and ages. And the longer it stagnates, the less likely it feels like it's coming. Now, again, Square Enix could surprise us and drop this out of nowhere, but I don't think anything else is really going to compete with Fire Emblem, because Fire Emblem has the fan base, it has the relevance, it has the history, and more important than that, it has the consistency. Again, when you have been for 35 years now consistently bringing out a game every 2 to 3 years, your CV, your resume speaks for itself, and the people will be around. I mean, you and I are from a generation that started with like Fire Emblem 7 23 years ago. It's been a while, or 22 years ago. I think 2003 was when it came out. We've been around. We haven't gone anywhere, and we're still equally as excited whenever a new Fire Emblem game comes out. So you have that repertoire that these other random one-shot games don't have. Triangle Strategy was fantastic, but it's not going to sell anywhere near what Fire Emblem's going to sell, despite it having arguably a higher quality than most Fire Emblem games.
And that's where I have to question you in terms of your overall viewpoint. Because I agree, absolutely. Fire Emblem, amazingly, based on its brand name alone, which is something that I don't think either of us would have expected 10, 15 years ago, probably more like 15 years ago now, based on the timeline that we've been talking about, would have. That would not be something that I would have expected it to have. But for a lot of people, and I've had a lot of YouTube comments, I've had a lot of people in stream X, Y, and Z, been like, I've never seen a game like this before. And that's not always for Fire Emblem. You and I both have been covering Dark Deity 2 recently, quite extensively. And I've had, personally, I've had a lot of people who've been like, you've introduced me to a genre that I had never heard of before. And now, of course, you know, all respect to Chip and the team at Sword and Axe and everything, the reach of Dark Deity 2 is, of course, nowhere near as big as anything related to anything Fire Emblem. But there's still a lot of people out there, potentially more than we kind of give credit to, who've never even heard of turn-based strategy RPGs before. But they get introduced. They learn mechanics. They see quality of voice acting, quality of mechanics. Through all these different games, Tri-Strat, Tactics Ogre Reborn, Dark Deity, hell, yeah, Dealfield Chronicles, even if that didn't do well, like there's going to be people, Unicorn Overlord, who encounter this style of game for the first time through these other titles that did not exist, or at least were not relevant at all in the public conscious when Fire Emblem was having its big boom. And now Fire Emblem's had a dip, and these other games are getting traction. So to me, even if in pure sales numbers, it's not competing, if I was in IS's shoes, I as a businessman would be like, what are these other games doing? What do we need to pay attention to that people who come back to our games or check out our games for the first time after seeing these other smaller titles might be like, well, why don't you have this? Why don't you have X, Y, and Z? Why is the voice acting worse? Why are the mechanics worse? Why do you not have this system that I'm expecting from this other thing? And that's where I think the question comes in. Because Fire Emblem was leading the pack by a country mile for a long time. And while they're still leading, I don't think it's quite as far of a distance as we might expect anymore.
I would agree with you for the most part. But to sit here and say Fire Emblem's not leading after a couple of successful SRPGs that came around at a time that Fire Emblem has mostly been a quote-unquote dormant is a little bit hard to judge.
Well, I would say it's definitely still leading. It's definitely still leading the public conscience. But it was leading by being the thing for a long time. And now I don't think it is as much. It's still leading, but...
It isn't, but we also forget that, the cross-pollination that happens from people who did get into SRPGs from something like a Triangle Strategy, or a Unicorn Overlord, or a Dark Deity 2, like you mentioned, or a Teofield Chronicles. These people are looking for more. And so I don't think you're taking away from Fire Emblem by having these new SRPGs come out. I think if anything, it's kind of like YouTube, right? You and I work together. Mm-hmm. A bunch of people who haven't heard of us aside from our own channels will be like, oh, hey, this guy that Link worked with is actually really cool. I'm going to go start watching his content too. And so I think a rising tide floats all boats, if that makes sense. I think you're just going to reinforce the Fire Emblem community with these new successes of strategy RPGs. If anything, it'll be good for Fire Emblem and Intelligent Systems to have that competition around, because a healthy competition is a good one where you will get respected for doing the thing that you do well. Now, if you don't do it well and people are like, I'd rather not play this, that's a whole different story. But I do think Fire Emblem always does come out with a certain level of quality that will have people having fun.
I would agree with that. And it's definitely for those of you, yourself, Link, and then the audience writ large who are familiar with the memes, like the holy shit 2 cakes meme is definitely at play here, especially considering the fact that in terms of niche genres, any sort of strategy RPG was pretty damn low on the list for a very long time. So people are just happy to have more. Absolutely. My question is more from the businessman, far-reaching, far-seer sort of perspective. Like, what do we need to look out for that people are liking about these other games that we're not doing? And that could be a very minor influence. Like, I'm not going to try and be here like, yes, my view of how this genre works is certainly the 100% accurate thing, of course, but I feel like it bears mention to think about the different questions of like, okay, if a game like Dark Deity or something much larger like Tri-Strat, or again, Tactics Ogre Reborn does really well, even if it's not the same style of game, what did they do from an overall art perspective that we haven't, or we have been criticized for, or that people just didn't like as much about us that we need to refine on now that this is a more growing genre? I think of like the escape shooter genre, like your Escape from Tarkov's, right? Which is obviously such a far cry from anything either of us normally talk about or cover, but it's something that's been growing over time, and now you have huge studios like Bungie, which, regardless of their struggles, are trying to muscle in on by making a huge new property in that space, and they're, of course, going to be paying attention to what these smaller projects have been doing that have helped to popularize the genre. So I'm not necessarily saying that they're worried about it, but more like trying to be like, all right, what did they do that's cool? Let's do that too, and work that in. So I don't know if that could be something that would be necessarily delaying things or pushing things back. But I kind of would like it to, because art learns from art. And I think people will like if their favorite thing suddenly incorporates something that's like, oh, they learned that from that so-and-so. That'd be cool. I would enjoy that.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think again, we talk about the cross-pollination and incorporation of other systems, and then you also brought up, like, what are we missing?
Yep.
And I think that goes both ways. I think one of the special things about Fire Emblem is that one of the real unique things that people connect with are the characters.
Mm-hmm.
I loved Triangle Strategy to death, one of my favorite SRPGs I've ever played, but I can't say that the quality of the characters in that game rivals anywhere close to Fire Emblem. I think a couple of them are very well developed, but Fire Emblem historically as a cast, you will always find diehard fans of every character because of who they are, how they look like, what they play like, their support conversations, their relevance in the story. Maybe a little bit less so in Engage because that game had a different take on the way the story was written. But the cast, by and large, is a big draw. In addition to just the timeless gameplay. It's a strategy RPG that's turn-based that has a different twist every now and then. And yeah, can they change the system? Can they learn from some other things? Absolutely. Should they? Hell yes. Hell yes. There needs to be more environmental interactions. There needs to be, more innovative gameplay and ways to tackle maps and clear it and all that stuff. And I do think it'll evolve. Again, this is probably the Fire Emblem fanboy in me, but it is an ever-evolving system that relies more so on much of the same. And maybe it is, now that they have the Switch 2 and a more powerful system, they're shooting for a more ambitious thing to come at us with. It could be that.
I can definitely see it. This is kind of leading into the last major topic that I kind of mentally wanted to broach here. But before we officially get into that, it does make me think about the way that we've been seeing more and more of an interaction between standard RPG systems and strategy or turn-based strategy RPG systems. Because you've got your XCOMs, which are obviously different in a way from your Final Fantasy Tactics, which is different in its way from your Fire Emblems. But then you've also got your things like your Baldur's Gates and your Divinity Original Sins or Sin 2s, and if you saw it at all, I covered it when it was first coming out, your Guild Sagas, which kind of blended Divinity and Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, you're starting to see more of a combination of these various different franchises and styles and genres, and they're learning from each other. A lot of things that we're seeing are elemental reactions, and as you mentioned, environmental reactions. Like, well, this type of terrain, if you use a spell, it will cause this interaction on this tile or the tiles around it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I can certainly see 5 different ways, 10 different ways that you could incorporate that into the way different mages and different spells and different abilities, items work in Fire Emblem. And I think that'd be super cool.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing this rise in awareness from a design standpoint of how these grid-based or hex-based systems can work. And that's where a lot of my kind of questions come from. So if you have any particular thoughts about that, I would love to hear them. And then I think I can lead us into the final point that I want to discuss. But go for it if you have any particular thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you said it very well. Just from the concept of how mages interact, I think the one thing I will say is please don't bring back Game Boy Advance Rain and how that impedes movement. I think that was a failed experiment, and we don't need to see that again.
Oh, yeah, I would agree.
But I would absolutely welcome elemental interactions. I would absolutely welcome every class having a way in which they can alter the map.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not in a game-breaking way, but again, I like to reference Triangle Strategy. One of my favorite characters is Jens.
Jens, my boy.
You create ladders and you climb up to positions that maybe you couldn't otherwise. You create this little catapult springboard that your enemy walks onto, and then it flicks them halfway across the map and they take huge amounts of damage. And it's limited by the amount of action points that you have, and so it's not as broken as it could be, but it is such a nice touch that creates a niche for this character that no one else can do, that alters the way you fundamentally play the game. And that, I think, is what we're missing with Fire Emblem. With Fire Emblem, they decided to go in the opposite direction, which is anyone can be anything and be free to make your characters in any way you want to be, which is also great. Having flexibility is good, but we're missing that real niche component that every single character has that makes that replayability a good thing and makes you being able to carve out a new way to play every time you replay the game. We're losing that. And I think that's one of the things that I would love to see come back.
I would absolutely agree in that regard, for sure. It's something that makes me always eager to replay Triangle Strategy. It's something that makes me eager to replay Divinity Original Sin 2 and Baldur's Gate 3. And we've seen more and more indie games recently embracing that type of thing. There's a few that I'm hoping to cover coming up soon, pretty soon, that do a lot of that type of stuff. But I think that leads into the final question that I want to ask here. And that really boils down to, if we're looking at a split between releasing a remake, like a full-fledged, fully voiced CG cutscenes, rebuilt maps, brand new engine, or at least completely revamped graphics, new gameplay systems, whatever version of Genealogy, but that's still constrained by what makes Genealogy, or do we want to take all these innovations, all these crossovers between different games in the overall genre, all this evolution that has happened, and make something new that incorporates all of that? Not only what would be maybe the best decision for IS and Nintendo, but what would you and I and the community writ large like to see the most? Because I certainly have a thought, but as the resident man who is literally Arvis in the conversation, I would like to hear your thoughts on it first.
So, if I am going to go with what I would want today, now, I mean, I think it's obvious I want to see the FE4 remake. Like, show me that game and watch me post daily for an entire year. I am not kidding. Like, I have so much to say and so much to talk about and so much to cover. Like, I could literally make an entire video about a single block on a map. You know what? Hold me accountable for that. Tell me, Link, you said you were going to make a video about a single tile on a map, and I will make it.
And a video every day for a year. You heard it here, folks. Link is going to make 365 videos in a year. You heard it here. Hold him to it.
Watch me. That game will light a fire under my ass that nothing has in a very long time. And that's how passionate I am on it, or about it. But honestly, I just want a Fire Emblem game. Like, the Fire Emblem fan in me, I would be happy to see either one. I would be happy to see a new one. I'd be happy to see a remake of Fire Emblem 4. I would be happy to see a remake of any other Fire Emblem game, because it just means I get to dive into this franchise that I really love again and share that with all of the people on YouTube, on Discord, on Reddit. Just, it is a thriving community when a new Fire Emblem game comes out, and I love that rush. Now, from a business standpoint, I don't know, man. I mean, if they're going to release something on the level of Three Houses, yeah, absolutely, no brainer. Drop the FE4 remake. If you've got an ambitious title that you know is going to rock the world the way Three Houses did in that E3 trailer in 2019, when I left work on my lunch break, sat on a bench outside in the middle of Boston, and I cried at the end of that trailer because it was so beautiful, then yeah, go there. Go there. You know, it's just beautiful. We're at such a good point in where we are that I don't think they can go wrong in whichever direction they go.
I mean, I would absolutely agree with you on that. Like, literally, no doubt. There's a reason that when I do streams with people to check out the new Nintendo Direct, or like a Square Enix showcase, or whatever, anywhere where there could be a crumb of information about a tactics game, whether it be FFT or like a new title, or like a new Tri-Strat, or a Fire Emblem game, or anything that could be connected in any way to that genre, I'm the same way. I just want more. And that's the beautiful thing about our genre, is we're not in the FPS genre, right? We're not in the open world Sony style third person action adventure genre. Like, we do not have a flood. We have a healthy amount to make people interested and give them choice. But for us, the dudes who are entrenched, who've played them all, or a lot of them, have seen them all, or a lot of them, we are so eager for more, and more than anything else, to get more people in. For me, that's what made Unicorn Overlord so special. Not just because it like catapulted my channel very well, but because so many people who saw it for the first time were like, there's games like this? I never would have expected. I get to build a whole army of characters, named characters and generics. Like, that's so cool. What the hell? What do you mean? What's Fire Emblem? What's Triangle Strategy? What's Final Fantasy Tactics? What's Tactics Ogre Reborn? What's DL Field Chronicles? Like, it puts us in a position to introduce so many people to something that we're so passionate about, while also getting to enjoy it ourselves for the first time, whether it's a remake or something new. So much like yourself, I'm going to be happy with pretty much whatever we see. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to stick my neck out a little bit. So long as it doesn't have the same visual stylings and story writing as Fire Emblem Engage, so long as it's not that, I'll be happy. As far as what would be good from a business perspective, I would not be surprised if IS and Nintendo want to go for something that's new again to help kind of recoup that red line goes down that they saw with Engage. Even if from an outside perspective, Engage still did great, they're a business. They're a corporation, multiple corporations and businesses, as a matter of fact. So they're going to want to kind of get that thing going back up and then bring in older stuff that's remade. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they tried to do something new and experimental to bring in a bunch of people again. But yeah, man, I'm totally on board with you, Link. Like, whatever they put out, I'm going to be there for. You know, you and I will both be there on first reveal day, crying on that bench, metaphorically or literally, being like, oh my God, it's happening. Oh my God. I'll be texting my girlfriend like, Jane, it's happening. Oh my God. I have to call off work for 2 weeks. So, yeah.
There will not be enough buckets.
No.
There will not be enough buckets to clear the flood that my tears will create if a Fire Emblem 4 remake is made. I'm telling you right now.
I do think it's going to happen. I really do. Because like you said, they did 1 through 3. I have no doubt that 4 is going to happen. I would be surprised if 5 and 6 actually didn't happen after that. I really think what it comes down to personally, this is kind of where I think we can start to wrap up. I think the fact that from a Suits perspective, Engage didn't push that red line up got people spooked. It's complete speculation, of course. I'm no businessman. But just given how things tend to work, I would not be surprised if that shuffled the priorities, the dev schedule, the release schedule, especially then with the Switch 2 coming up. So I personally, much like you were saying, like, you know, hold you to it. Genealogy 4 gets announced, video a year, hardcore, like 100% going to be, you're going to quit your job, you're going to live your life developing videos for Genealogy 4. Definitely, that's me saying it, not you. But if that were to happen, cool. But I don't see it, even though I would love it.
And that's a fair take, honestly. Like, I can totally see them just being like, well, let's pause this right now and let's really create some kind of kick-ass title that'll get this new console going. I can see it completely.
It's almost kind of sad to say that. Like, that, it's one thing for me to say it. It's another thing to hear you say it, and then suddenly it's like, oh, it was just me before. I was just being a doomer. But now I put it out in the world and someone else agrees, and that's sad. Like,
you know, I don't think it's sad, because I think Fire Emblem 4 fans, the longer we wait for this title, the more polished it can potentially be. Look at the polish that Shadows of Valentia got. Mm-hmm. That game looks and sounds great.
Oh my God, yeah.
And that's why I didn't want to see it on the Switch one. For the first time ever, I did not want to see Fire Emblem in a Nintendo Direct. Ever. Never in my life have I ever said I don't want to see Fire Emblem until the Switch 1 Direct that was at the end of March. Because I wanted it to look good. I wanted them to be working on something of a higher tier, higher quality. I'm willing to wait for quality. It's been 30 years since the game's been out. I'll wait another 2, 3. That's fine. But I'll get that quality, and I will be satisfied. And that's why I'm okay if it doesn't come back. That's why I'm okay if the business gets in the way, as long as we do eventually get it.
I think I agree with you on that. It's definitely, it's an interesting situation to be in, since we had kind of the weird dev cycle of Three Houses being in large part Koei Tecmo, and then having Engage be almost entirely IS. You know, we had some stuff from Gust with the visuals and everything. But now we kind of get to go back. Like, all right, we had one huge title. We had another definitely successful title. But in many ways, two different teams. Maybe we have to give it the chance to let the business settle out, to let the dev cycle settle out, to figure out the balance between what one game versus another game did. And I'm certainly okay with that. You know, as a great man once said, a delayed game can always be good, but a rushed game will always be bad. Right?
Indeed.
And as I've always said, Fire Emblem is my favorite game series of all time. If they got to really take their time and let it cook and figure stuff out, I'm certainly okay with that, much as you said. So at the end of the day, I don't think there's really anything we can draw on right now to try and say, like, this is probably what they're going to be doing. But I think this was definitely a very good discussion overall. And I'm glad that we had it, Link. Are you feeling good? Is there anything else that you want to, like, touch on, cover, come back to, anything like that?
No, absolutely. This was a great discussion. I hope the viewers found it as engaging and as three-housing as it could possibly be. And yeah, you guys let us know what you think. Honestly, I love to see the comments and hear what other people think. So, you know, let's hear what the community says too.
8 more years of Titanium Legman and Link discussing Fire Emblem discourse.
I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, hell yeah, same. Yeah, completely. Like, guys, let us know what it is that you think is going to be happening here. If you have any perspective, any thoughts, any hopes, anything like that, let us know in the comments. Of course, as well, for anyone that knows me but doesn't happen to know Link, go check out his stuff. I will have his channel linked in the description. No pun intended, once again. Absolutely phenomenal. I've been very much enjoying collabing with you on various different videos, discussing stuff. It's been an absolute joy of an experience, and I hope it's something we get to do more in the future. And as you've been saying, cross-pollinating our audiences, because I think there's definitely, obviously, a lot of overlap there. So, guys, go do that. And once again, thank you for being here, Link.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and I'm glad we found this new partnership. I think it's been fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. It's just fun. You know, it's one thing when you're just a lonely man on an island talking about your favorite little video games, and then suddenly you find someone else who you can talk with about it, and it's like, oh, this is so nice. So
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, everyone, I will, as always, wish you a fine evening. I will hope to have this episode out for all y'all as soon as possible. And until the next time, of course, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Peace out, everyone. We'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.